This is the Mark Patterson Show on BBC Radio Foyle and Sounds. Folks, you can pick up the phone. The number's coming up. The Facebook page is BBC Radio Foyle. The team email is patterson@bbc.co.uk. And my personal email, if you want it, is mark.patterson@bbc.co.uk.
Your news, your views. The Mark Patterson Show on BBC Radio Foyle and BBC Sounds. Get in touch. Phone 0300 123 1001. Text 81771. Start your message with the word Foyle. Standard geographic charges apply. Or look us up on BBC Radio Foyle on social media.
Folks, huge issue, and one that if the stats are right here, that an awful lot of you will be able to relate to. It's an important issue, picking up on a recent article in the Derry News that talked about stats from the Family Practitioner Services General Pharmaceutical Services Report. It revealed that the Derry City and Strabane District Council has the highest level of antidepressant prescribing across the north. 35,000 people here received antidepressants in 2022-23, 23.4% of the population, compared to 19% of the population overall. The figures have increased from 22% back in 2021-22. We have a full house of guests on this one, folks. Joining me in the studio, delighted that the mental health champion for Northern Ireland, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, is here, along with Radio Foyle regular local GP Dr. Joe McAvoy. On the line, we'll get a word with Karen Collins, the CEO of Aware NI, and Sara Boyce is part of the new script for mental health campaign. You're all very welcome. Good to have you, and good to have the two of you here in studio. Professor O'Neill, do the figures do they surprise you?
Not at all. The figures, I've been tweeting about this recently as well. The NISRA figures that came out recently did show that 1 in 5 people here are taking antidepressants or have received a prescription for antidepressants. Not the same as actually taking the antidepressants, and that's another thing we need to look at. And it's a quarter of women. It's highest actually in the 45 to 64 year olds. In the females, you know, it goes up to nearly half of that age group. And I suppose it's indicative of the fact we are talking about our mental health more, and people are coming forward and asking for help. And, you know, in some ways that's a good thing. But I would always be arguing that as per the mental health strategy, we do need other options. You know, antidepressants work for many, many people, but they don't work for some people. And people would want to have those other non-pharmaceutical interventions, including talking therapies. But at the minute, we just don't have the staff to deliver the therapies that people are asking for. And some people actually ask for antidepressants, and that's what they want, and are happy with that. So we shouldn't be shaming people who are taking antidepressants. So it's a very, very complicated story, but it demonstrates the high proportions here of people who struggle with poor mental health.
Joe, what's the story in the surgery? I mean, what would your brother and sister doctors be telling us today about changing times? I mean, surely that's a very high figure.
It's a very high figure, isn't it, Mark? It surprised me, to be quite honest. But yeah, when you think, exactly as Sarah said, this would be people who've maybe had even one prescription for antidepressants through the year. So it doesn't mean that like a quarter of the population at any one time are on antidepressants. I mean, the nice guidance is very much that we consider other therapies first, so that you have a decent conversation with somebody to understand what they mean when they say they're depressed, because it may well be that there are other issues in their lives, addiction problems, or these days obviously cost of living problems. And so the most appropriate person might be somebody completely different from what they're thinking, or no medication at all. So you might be thinking of addiction services, you might be thinking of even social work to get them out of a hole if they've got some financial difficulties or stress that way. And the guidelines would suggest that we don't use antidepressants in people in the milder depressed group. So even if they are diagnosed with depression, there's a score we do which is sort of a generalised rough guide to depression. And NICE guidelines currently say if you're under 16 in that score, that you consider alternative therapies such as talking therapy or even exercise therapy, etc. First of all, rather than rush straight for an antidepressant tablet.
But having a talk therapist is expensive, Joe. Bluntly, are antidepressants, just had to put it bluntly, cheap?
They're very cheap, Mark. And the thing about it is, it's sort of a triple whammy, if you like, Mark, because antidepressants, even if you're not depressed, while they won't do anything good for you, they are very unlikely to do anything bad. So it's sort of, you can understand in the mind of a pressurised GP surgery in the light of, a very limited number of appointments to see a doctor, and in the light of people who can't access talking therapies, etc. It's a very easy reach for a doctor to say, I'll give you this, Prozac or alternative along those lines, and you won't come to any harm, or you're very unlikely to come to any harm, but it may not do any good, and you can see why it is a very attractive option. Plus the patient feels, well, I'm getting an antidepressant, I'm getting treated for this, where it may not be the most appropriate treatment for that particular
Probably strategies. Siobhan, I'll come back to you in a wee second. Sara Boyce, nice to have you on today, Sara. Sara, when you talk about a new script for mental health, what's at the core of that? Just take us into that world.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thanks for having us on.
You're very welcome.
First of all, to say fair play to the Derry News and to Catherine McGinty for highlighting this. This is a major public health issue. There's no getting away from that. These rates are really shocking. But also, I think it's important to recognise that this isn't something that has just emerged in the last few years. This is a pattern that has been developing for at least the last 20 years. We had a major report in 2014 at that stage saying that we were, unfortunately, a world leader in terms of prescribing of antidepressants. As for the new script for mental health, I think the core thing here for us is that it needs to be about choices and options, including for GPs, pleased to hear what Dr. Joe has just been saying around the need for other therapies first, because this is serving nobody well. It's certainly not serving the people who are in distress and need some kind of support. People should have access to antidepressants as one option, and GPs should have them as one option to offer patients for short-term usage, and it shouldn't be medication first by default, and that's what's just been highlighted around the NICE guidelines. But the reality at the moment is that because talking therapies are effectively a severely rationed resource, that the only option often for GPs within a 10-minute slot is to offer a prescription, which Joe has just acknowledged.
But I can understand that from the practitioner's point of view, Sarah, that they know they've got so many people coming through in a day, and they have to be active and being shown Absolutely. To be active on their computer. And I've done something with this patient. I can understand a doctor feeling, look, it's a simple case of antidepressants here.
And so can we, when doctors have no other option. And the reality is, supposed to look at where we're at in terms of talking therapies. The reality at the moment, one thing to say, we're talking about cost, there was mentioned, but there isn't any shortage around therapists being available. There isn't a workforce issue here, and Siobhan had mentioned we don't have the staff, but thankfully when it comes to counsellors, there are any amount of qualified and trained counsellors ready to take up positions. So that isn't an issue. The issue is at a level where the department and the chief medical officer need to kind of have an urgent look at all of this. Where is the money going? Because if we see every year that 13 million on average is going into antidepressants, that's quite a lot of spend on antidepressants by comparison with around 2 or 2.2, 2.3 million on talking therapies. That's minuscule. In the Western Trust, it was about 141,000 last year for talking therapies. That doesn't even cover the southern end of that trust, the Fermanagh Omagh area. So what the new script for mental health are saying is that we need to see the department taking decisive action and starting to move away from the funding, the medicalisation of distress, into starting putting money into talking therapies. And I think just to mention, if I can, Mark, a report came out yesterday just from the department on their mental health strategy. And that mental health strategy is over the next 10 years. And there is a plan in that to increase access to and have a rollout of talking therapy through these hubs across the entire 5 trusts.
But to be clear, Sarah, are you saying there are enough therapists, or that we need more funding for therapists?
Yeah, there are enough therapists, and what we're seeing is community organisations, like we happened to visit with Kuna recently up in Derry there, doing amazing work on the ground, but those community groups are being starved of funding for counselling. There's a workforce sitting there, but the problem where it lies is back with the department, because the mental health strategy, this last year, it seems to be they had a workshop. That seems to be the main piece of work that was carried out last year around expanding access to talking therapies. This coming year, looking at what they've set out in their strategy, their delivery plan, they're talking about reviewing the outcomes of that workshop. That's a glacial pace of progress. That's the slow walk, that isn't going to get us where we need to be. This is urgent. We can't continue medicalising, and particularly in communities like in Derry and deprived communities.
But just before I bring Karen in, because I know professionally that's a key part of your statutory responsibilities, are the matters that Sarah's bringing up there. What's your take on that broad picture of the availability of therapies and funding and all the rest?
So one of the things that was completed recently is a review of the mental health workforce, and I put that out on Twitter later with the link to it. But it outlines the kind of the scale of the change that we need and the new training places that need to be commissioned. In some professional groups, we're talking about increases of over 100%, a doubling of the workforce. So there are huge numbers of vacancies across our mental health services, and even with the Healthy Happy Minds, which was a different programme, but again there was very real difficulties getting the qualified therapists that were needed for that programme. So workforce remains a really, really important issue, and I'll tweet out some of the figures from that workforce review that was completed. So I'm also really frustrated with the speed of progress on the strategy, but workforce is a significant difficulty, particularly in psychology and psychiatry, who would deliver a lot of the higher level talking therapies. Counselling covers a really, really broad range of skills, but it can often be better for the mild to moderate mental health difficulties. But we really need more psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and nurses as well.
Karen, I am coming to you. Joe, in a word, how confident are you when you recommend a patient for a talk therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, or more serious interventions? How confident would you be that patient will get it and will get it in a timely fashion?
It's very difficult to say. It's very much it's in flux all the time. So, for example, we have a separate counsellor in our practice. Now, not every practice has this. We're just lucky we have that, as well as a mental health practitioner permanently in the practice. So, and they both offer talking therapy. So, I can have a word with them at a very, literally in the practice and have a word if there's somebody I'm particularly concerned about or somebody I feel needs an intervention really urgently. But that's, again, we're very lucky in that, and that is so patchy. I mean, they don't have that at all in Fermanagh, for example. At the higher level, again, exactly as has been said, it's very, very difficult. If you want to get somebody to see, I don't even know the last time I've had anybody see a psychologist. And for severe depression, seeing a psychiatrist itself is very, very difficult. And for that reason alone, sometimes we are putting people into a holding pattern just using these medications.
Karen Collins, thank you firstly for your patience, Karen. I'm trying to get to four important voices on the programme today. Karen is the CEO, as I say, of Aware Northern Ireland. Karen, Professor O'Neill has taken us into interesting territory in the past when she... when we talk about the troubles, when we talk about gay people, when we talk about difficulties in life and how inequalities in life have very, very real bearings on real lives. What about the socioeconomics here? I mean, it's certainly no accident that, this part of the world traditionally and sadly and lamentably is so often at the bottom of all the important lists, Karen, and that can't be an accident.
Yeah, and unfortunately it's not exclusive to the northwest of the province either. It's unfortunately a very sad fact that health inequalities exist right across the province, and it's very sad that we continue to see those living in deprived communities suffering the most extreme effects of both physical and mental ill health. And in terms of needing to take action to address that, very little really being done to effectively to combat that. But it's unfortunately not a new thing that we're seeing. It's something you can track back over statistics in many years where deprived communities are at the worst end of both physical and mental ill health.
Karen, what's happened in our lifetimes? I don't even remember this conversation when I was a kid, even among the adults and stuff. So that has revolutionised, and that's a good thing. We're talking about this all the time. We're bringing modern understanding to a very complicated thing. What do you think's happening in our lifetime? The lot of people in Northern Ireland, particularly Derry, Londonderry today, that so many people are just really sad and broken.
Well, sad and broken is, I mean, the fact that we're talking more about mental ill health, let's take the positive from that though. And I agree with you, in our lifetime that certainly has changed. I've been working in the sector for about 20 years, and significant things like provision of counselling services in schools has done a huge amount to open up the conversation about our mental health. And then much more recently, the whole dynamic around COVID, we saw so many more people, businesses particularly, adults, school children, young people, the conversation around mental health changed dramatically. And those are two key things that I've certainly seen that has changed that conversation. And
Karen,
I think
do you think that we've taken
out of
stock at all fully of COVID and the isolation, people on their own, people, just spending like a couple of years of life essentially disengaging? I mean, there's a piece of work in there.
There's a real learning point in that exercise of just how many people were affected by poor mental health during COVID that had never experienced issues with their mental health before. Certainly at Aware, we saw a much larger number of people coming forward looking for help, joining our support groups, ringing our support lines, because they had never experienced the isolation and the lack of personal contact that we all experienced during COVID, and how to cope with that whenever your normal ways of dealing with life are taken away. We couldn't exercise the way we normally could. We couldn't socialise the way we normally did. And exercise, social interaction, all of these things are hugely important to positive mental health. And we know when those are taken away that they have a really detrimental impact. And those were some key learning points from COVID that we need to not lose. But I suppose getting back on track to the point of this conversation, some of the things that we wanted to highlight was medication is hugely important. We never want to take away the need for antidepressants for some parts of the population and to stigmatise the use of it. But some of the concerning things for us is the lack of those other services, not just counselling and talking therapies. We run a network of support groups. We also run a lot of education and awareness raising programs to help people know more about their mental health and how to take steps in terms of self-care. And those are services and resources that are not well supported. There's not enough of them, and they're not being well enough resourced. And at the moment, we're seeing more and more cuts to those services and a lack of finances to help us be able to continue to deliver those services. Okay. And that's going to have an even more detrimental impact on our communities.
Joe, how confident are you with the efficacy of the various drugs? There was a major documentary recently on the BBC. It talked about sertraline and other popular antidepressants. How confident are you when you prescribe that there will be a change in that patient's life? Is it 50%? Is it lower? What do you see?
Well, it is important to manage expectations, and a lot of the conversation when we're starting these medications is to say, for example, because people misunderstand them. First of all, they're not addictive. You do hear that. I don't want to get addicted to these. And you said, listen, they're not addictive.
But that programme made the point, and they weren't saying, they were agreeing with you there, but they were saying that other aspects became lifestyle issues around, taking the antidepressants. And it was a complicated picture. I can't remember the exact point. I should have chased it up.
That's the thing. So they don't work instantly. They work in a very gradual form. And in fact, we don't really consider them having failed, unless the person has really been taking them steadily for 6 weeks at an appropriate dose, and they still haven't had any benefits. So 6 weeks is a long time. If you look now, we're sort of at the start of August. If you're talking mid-September before you see if the tablet's going to work, that's a long time to see if it's going to work.
And why would that be so slow when a headache tablet works in 5 minutes? Why would an antidepressant take 6 weeks?
It's the way they work, Mark. They work gradually. So some people can be very lucky. I have seen people improve inside a week, but things like, for example, motivation and drive can rise before mood rises, for example. Sleep improvement can happen before anything else. So, but that's difficult as well, because if you think about it, if you have somebody who's depressed, like profoundly depressed, and you've given them a tablet that's going to improve their drive and their motivation, but not their mood, I mean, there's a suicide risk there, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into taking the tablets. So we're very aware of the limitations of them. But the other thing I would say is the reason there's so many of them is because not every tablet works for every person. So even if you've got the diagnosis right to start with, and you're not missing something like the fact that they've had maybe a relationship breakup, or there's something in their lives that has caused this depression that we're not catching on to, even if you get the diagnosis right, sometimes then you will have to change the tablets to try and get one that suits this person.
Siobhan, I know that a lot of your analysis is based on grassroots experience and sitting down listening to prisoners, sitting down listening to people who have suffered in their troubles, people who have been traumatised one way or the other in life. Pick up on that socio-economic picture about how tough life can be. I mean, you've helpfully joined the dots on some really complicated stuff down the years, and you're just going, of course, when you put it like that. But what do you believe to be the socioeconomics at the heart of this? The Derry Strabane figures, as I say, economically, we're so often at the bottom of that. So how simple is the case if you don't have in life that you're going to be sad or you're going to be down about stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, we were taught the stress diathesis model of depression. Stress and chronic, uncontrollable stress does lead to depression. And when you have these structural factors that impact on people's lives, such as poverty is the big one. And the New Script campaign group do this really well. They talk about the impact of the structural factors and the social policies outside of health that impact on our mental health and well-being. Things like childcare, things like how we address issues in the workplace as well, factors associated with our education system and the pressure we put on young people. So all of those factors play a part in the mental health of the individual. So it's not as simple to say that that somebody can take control of their own life and change things. And for some people, a medication might be part of their treatment pathway, and that might be the thing that gets them to change aspects of their lives. But there may be things that they cannot change, structural factors, and that's why mental health is political in that sense as well. And we find that in areas like Derry and Strabane, you have higher rates of antidepressants and indeed higher rates of suicide, But antidepressants are used across all the socioeconomic classes as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need to make a point. It's not that the middle classes don't get depressed. I mean, they've got to get a good car in the driveway,
And I suppose the COVID pandemic, when you look at that as well, there were people who benefited. Many people were able to rearrange their lives and they were better off and had better mental health there too. So it's a very, very mixed picture.
I was talking to an artist the other day and he said he loved it because he had Ebrington to himself, and the Hares came back to Ebrington. They're Irish native Hares apparently in Ebrington. I've never seen them live 2 streets away, but he was saying it was marvellous.
And stuff like that, that's joyous, and that's kind of, that feeds into what depression is and what it isn't. Being unable to find joy in anything, that's a sign that you might want to talk to your doctor about your mental health.
Sara Boyce, pick up on that for us, would you? Because, look, let's be brutally honest, this place can be bleak. When it comes to our body politic, when it comes to stuff getting done or not getting done, sitting in this chair down the years of, you just see some of that bigger picture. Sarah, solutions, address that, because no health minister in place. Budgets, well, I don't know where the budgets are going to go, where they're going to find the money for stuff. And, do you see solutions on the horizon, Sarah, with regard to where you're going with the new script?
Absolutely, Mark. And I'm glad you've asked that. There are lots of things that can be done here. What we in New Script have just completed a survey asking people what their solutions are. So going back to people in grassroots across all communities, asking them, what is it that you think could make things better in relation to mental health? And the one big thing coming out of it, not one person said we need quicker and more access to medication. That's just not an issue.
But if Siobhan's right, Sarah, pay rise. Well, these are the practicalities of life. If you're not struggling to put food on the Wayne's table and suddenly you get a wee pay rise, or life gets better materialistically, I guess that's probably part of people's journey.
Absolutely. And inextricably linked, as Siobhan said, that, structural factors, all of these things like poverty and inequality are the things that are driving. So they need to be tackled. But what people were looking for, really interestingly coming out of our survey, was the top thing that came out that people want is access to other ways of healing from trauma and distress. So things like the arts, things like creativity, access to nature. The second biggest thing that has come out of this survey that New Script has done is access to doing things with other people in community, at a community level. Because what happens with mental health, the way it has been framed and talked about, is that it's something individual that's wrong with the person in the brain. And we know now that is not what's happening. But what is happening is what you've said, is people are up against it, the pressure that they're having from the cost of living crisis, and it's impacting on women most. And that's why then we see women, in terms of the prescribing rates. But what people want is greater choice and access and control over what they need. But in terms of solutions, Mark, here's something that the department can do tomorrow, working with the trusts. First of all, we have no data on talking therapies. Every time we need to get data, we have to use Freedom of Information, which is insane. In England, they publish the data monthly on a dashboard. The way we did here with COVID, we know things can be tackled very quickly. So we need to see the data on the waiting times across all of the trusts for talking therapies, and the prescribing data, because we don't actually know the data for long-term prescribing, which is really concerning. As was said earlier, that data we're talking about today is, that says that a person had at least one prescription in the last year. What we need to see is how many prescriptions, how long are people on them, who are the people that are on them long term, maybe without being reviewed. So we need the data. But the department need to come and talk to people in NewScript and people in the community. They're, as I said earlier, the pace of change around talking therapy, improving access, it seems, almost at a standstill in the department.
Maybe that's why. Maybe the information, if the information was readily available, maybe it would prove, embarrassing to the authorities.
The other good thing I wanted to share with you, just when you're saying around how difficult all of this is, we secured cross-party, all-party consensus around counselling back in 2021. Kind of got lost with COVID, but all the parties apart from the UUP, the activists went out and talked to them. They all signed up to an agreement on what's needed around counselling. And one was that nobody should wait longer than 28 days to get access to counselling. We need an end to the postcode lottery that continues.
Okay.
Fermanagh and Omagh don't have any access at the moment. That's sitting there, and that's what we need to go back to. NewScript activists are calling on the department. They need to come and talk to people in the communities who know what's happening and know what's needed.
Okay, listen, Sarah, we appreciate you joining us today. Karen, just a final word. By the way, I'm delighted none of you have mentioned cycling. On a lighter note, I'm only being light about this. I came over the Foyle Bridge the other day with Gareth Austin and Mickey Doherty, and I thought I was going to drop, for goodness sake. The legs, as your man said, look after your knees. Karen, you'll miss them when they're gone. Karen, just briefly if you can, because I'm just delighted to be able to include the four of you today, such senior figures in your own rights. Karen, solutions. Do you find yourself getting out of bed in the morning optimistic when you see the in-tray?
Well, some days yes and some days no, I suppose, like most of us. I think there is an optimistic picture here. We do know that there are solutions that are possible to improve the situation. I think we just want to galvanise support around that. We want to see the Assembly back moving forward on that mental health strategy and seeing a movement forward on investment into it. And listening to the positives that we know can really make change for people's lives. Sarah's already given us some great examples there of what her survey has said. We know what the answers are. We just need to move forward on them and have our government support that for us as well.
Well, listen, thank you to both of you on the phone. That's Karen Collins from Aware and Sara Boyce from the NewScript for Mental Health campaign. The gender aspect of this, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, is interesting. And is that, it could be as simple as to say that's socioeconomic as well. If there's not equal wages, I mean, does that explain partially that there's so many more women on antidepressants than men? I don't know. Yeah,
well, there might be biological factors there too, because we do see that increase of women in their middle age. And we wonder how much of that is perimenopause, menopausal symptoms that are being treated overtly with antidepressants or that are being misdiagnosed as depression. And it's very, there's a lot of overlap there, so it's not necessarily inappropriate prescribing either. But I think, women are having children later. We have really, this is my age group, like multiple responsibilities, juggling different things, parents getting older, childcare, economic pressure, all of that does play a part for that age group, for women, and we have a sexist, misogynistic culture that we're living in, and that's going to have its outworkings as well. So yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to general practitioners, Joe sitting beside you, Siobhan, it's not an assessment of their performance, I don't mean that, but in terms of our GPs and A, the pressure they're under, B, the demand for antidepressants, a doctor can't force you to take a tablet. So what would you say to our GPs in terms of their workload, but in terms of the questions that work like this raises, in terms of a quarter of the population being on antidepressants? There's something out of balance there, Siobhan.
Yeah, but I think GPs are under pressure themselves. A lot of GPs are struggling with their mental health. Self-care is absolutely, and I don't say that, I think self-care means looking after your own mental health first so that you can connect with people and understand them what's going on behind the stories that they're telling you and trying to make a more accurate diagnosis. And it's nearly impossible to do with the pressure our GPs are under at the minute. So again, there are structural factors that need to change so that GPs can do the job that they want to do really well, which is try to work out what's wrong with patients and help them help negotiate a kind of a solution that works for them, whether that be medication or the 4 pillars of good mental health, which is food, exercise, social connection and sleep. if you get, and often that's what the antidepressants will help you get. And if you can get those 4 things in order, then your mental health will improve.
Just
too.
repeat them again, Siobhan. I mean, they're painfully obvious, but yeah, we need to
but it's getting the physical stuff right.
Food.
So it's food, and I don't mean diet. I mean like good, nutritious food, diverse range of food to support your gut microbiome. We know that's important now too. Exercise, physical activity, a natural antidepressant that has, in some studies, been shown to have the same level of benefit as a medication. Social connection, so powerful, and that's what people in Sarah's consultation, that's what they wanted, that social connection. It's very, very powerful. And then the final one is getting the sleep right, and it can be hard, but if you have good sleep hygiene and put them all together, you're not going to be too far wrong.
Okay, listen, Professor Neil, thank you for joining us.